So basically, this is one of those ones where they give you something to read, and then they make you answer stuff about it. So in this one, they're saying the American whooping crane and the California condor are two of North America's largest birds. Although both are rare and endangered, they are protected, and large preserves are available for them. The two species, however, seem to be responding differently to conservation efforts. In 1937, the whooping crane population was reduced to 14 individuals. It has since recovered, and currently more than 200 birds live and breed in the wild. In the preservation of endangered species, the whooping crane is a success story. On the other hand, the California condor population declined rapidly, so no birds remained in the wild between 1987 and 1992. Condors were reintroduced into the wild after 1992, and approximately 50 condors currently live in the wild in California and Arizona. However, the recovery program cannot yet be considered a success. So that's the background information that they're giving you. And now on the subsequent pages, they're going to ask you to, provide some information about these things. Okay, so this one is, it's kind of annoying, I think, because they just kind of expect you to just, be an expert on the whooping crane and the condor, okay, which you may be an expert about them, but you may not, okay, so we need to think about, for this one, we want to, because, for example, me, I'm not a super, bird person, I'm not a huge expert on these species, and so I need to think about what is most likely going to, cause endangered species, right? Cause a species to go endangered, even if I don't know this particular species, right? So we had something that we called hippo. And it was like habitat loss, invasive species, pollution, I always forget the next P, and then overconsumption or over exploitation. Okay, so these are things that basically cause the things that are going extinct and going endangered. It's one of these things, and habitat loss is the most likely one. That's the biggest because humans are converting habitats all the time. So since we don't know these particular ones, right? Or you may, but if you don't know these particular ones, or they have a species that you don't know in particular, and they ask a question kind of like this, you want to hedge your bets basically. And so, since habitat loss is the most likely cause of endangered species or habitat decline, or extinctions, you want to go with habitat loss. That would be the best one anyway. So we could mention habitat loss, and the other thing. Sorry, before I go any further. I wanted to show you this. So this one asks you to identify and describe. Now, on the real AP exam, they've started bolding these action words, at least the last few that I've seen. But this is from 2003, and they hadn't bolded them then. So they want you to identify, and they want you to describe. Okay, and they want 2. Okay, there's no sense doing 3 or 4 or 5. They don't give you extra points for being overachiever. They're only allowed to read the first 2 causes, so make sure your first 2 are the best, okay? And then they tell us we can describe 1 cause for each species or 2 causes of species. It doesn't matter, okay? So we can talk about habitat loss, right? So we could say the whooping crane, something about the whooping crane suffered. I'm going to give you a chance to do one in a second. From habitat loss. Okay, so I identified habitat loss. I got my ID point. Okay, that's going to give me my ID point. And then we can say due to, and we can pick basically anything. We can pick wetland destruction. We can say they're fossil fuels. They're excavating for fossil fuels. We can say natural disasters, urbanization, anything like that. Okay, I'm going to say urbanization. And so urbanization, that would be like another ID. So I need to say something like which removed their nesting and food source. Reduce might be a better word. So, okay, so I would prefer to say reduce. So I can just put one line through it and write reduced. Okay, on the AP exam, you have to write with a blue or black pen on your FRQs, and you don't have to scribble. All you have to do is put like one line through it and then write whatever you want on top, and they will completely ignore what you had underneath. I've had students before that have said that they're gonna like, write song lyrics or something and then put one cross through it, just to, because they know, I mean, you can obviously read it, but they're supposed to ignore it. So just to kind of make the reader laugh. I don't know if they actually did that or not, but they've said they were going to. So, and then we can put another one, or we can put, or we can give one for the condor. So again, I don't know a lot about the condor, but I'm betting it probably suffers from habitat loss as well. Now, let's see. So we can't use habitat. They're not going to let you do habitat loss to urbanization because that's basically the same thing, right? But we could say, for example, habitat loss due to agricultural conversion. We could say that, right? So we could say the condor suffered from habitat loss due to agricultural conversion, which reduced habitat, I'm running out of space, and turned into ag lands. Now, if you don't run out of space like I do, you would want to actually like write that in a sentence. Supposedly, technically, they're not supposed to grade bullet points. I've heard conflicting things about whether they will grade bullet points or not. So I just like to put stuff in sentences just to be safe, because you don't want to have the right answer and then have them be like, well, it wasn't a bullet point, so I can't grade it. So that's my personal opinion anyway. So there's part A, and that one was probably worth 4 points because we had to identify and describe. Okay, now this one says describe. So that means if we ID, we get 0 points on this one. You have to ID. And then it says describe 2 measures that have been taken to protect the species. Okay. And it says you must specify which species you're talking about. So you can't just say, like captive breeding programs and be done. You have to say like which one. Okay, so you can talk about legislative measures that have been taken. And so this is one of those times where I really like to have, there's a lot of legislation that you need to know for the AP exam, and you probably don't know a lot of it yet, and that's okay. But there's a lot that you need to know, a lot of legislation they want you to know for the AP exam, but I don't know about you, but I can't remember every single piece of legislation. Like, there's a reason I'm not a political science major, right? I majored in science. That's what I can remember, science stuff. So what I like to do is I like to take a few widely applicable laws, and I just like to kind of remember those, and that way I don't have to remember a bunch. Like, for example, the rubric has the Lacey Act, Endangered Species Act, CITES, Clean Water Act, Migratory Bird Treaty, Migratory Bird Conservation Act, and then a bunch of other stuff. So, I'm not going to, I didn't, I probably wouldn't even know if I hadn't read this, that there was a Migratory Bird Conservation Act, right? But I do know there's an Endangered Species Act, and it's really widely applicable. So what I like to do is I like to memorize like the Endangered Species Act and know that it protects endangered or threatened species and their habitat. And so I like to save that one because that one is used, like, you can use that for almost any FRQ where they ask you for a piece of legislation or they ask you for something where you want to protect a species or something like that. You can almost always use that Endangered Species Act because it is so broad. And so instead of having to memorize like the Migratory Bird Act and the Migratory Bird Treaty, you can just remember the Endangered Species Act, and that can, regardless of what species they're talking about in a question like this, you'll have something in your back pocket. So since you have to describe, right, you'd have to mention the Endangered Species Act, and then you'd have to say what it did, right? So it basically protects species and then you could say like this protects both birds. Okay, and then you have to think of something else. Okay. So if you knew another piece of legislation, you could write that. For example, the Clean Water Act, that's another one I like to remember. You could, because it's pretty widely applicable, you could say that this one protects the wetlands that the whooping cranes live in. And then you could say, there's a captive breeding program. Or something like that, tagging, stuff like that. Now, what I would probably do is I would mention the captive breeding program since they had that in their introduction. And I would say, like, the condor was protected with a captive breeding program. Now, that would just be identifying it. So then you had to, you'd have to say, like, this established populations that could then be released to the wild or something like that. You're not supposed to again. I think I'm like a gas. I just take up the space that is available to me. So that would be 2 points. Okay, if you had just if you had just said like protect with captive breeding programs, you wouldn't have points. If you had just said the Endangered Species Act, you wouldn't have gotten any points. You have to, when you describe, you have to say why. Okay. Okay, so here's another one. This one, again, it wants you to describe, so you can't just ID, you've got to describe, and it wants to, again, so we're probably at 4 points for Part A, 2 points for Part B. Okay, actually Part A, it says that they gave you a point for the ID and the describe. So if you just ID'd and didn't describe, you got 0 points. So you have to ID and describe for each point. So you've got 2 in Part A, 2 in Part B, and now you'll get 2 in Part C. Okay, so this one talks about 2 important characteristics of an endangered species that would cause it to be slow to recover. I'm going to see if you can help me with this one. Can you think of any reason why an endangered species, basically why they go endangered? Why are they slow to recover? Why do they have difficulty reestablishing their populations? I'll give you a little time to think about that, like maybe like a minute or so, and then I'll get back to you, and we'll see what we can come up with. If you can't come up with anything, that's that's okay. I get that this material is pretty new, but just kind of that practice of trying to like think on the spot is good for an FRQ. So they want like a yeah, that would make them hard to recover, but they want something that's like intrinsic to the critter. So let me give you an example and then see if you can think of one. So like a lot of times endangered species are all those cute things like pandas, tigers, stuff like that. They're what they call charismatic megafauna. They're big animals, and so a lot of times these animals they're really big, and so they need like a large range or a large place to live in. And so and because they are so big, they're not like insects or something where they're going to be a whole bunch in one area. They're going to be kind of spread out because just the fact that they're large and they need more space. And so you could say something like because they need a large range, or it might be difficult for them to survive in a small habitat if their habitat's been displaced, like you mentioned. Or it might just be difficult to find mates because they're not close together. They don't hang out close together a lot of times. So you're not being displaced was right, but we need to somehow relate that back to like an intrinsic character of the critter. So can you think of something else that maybe like an endangered species you can think of might make it difficult for them to keep going or to recover? So I just wrote the ones that I had mentioned. Um, and if you can think of something that's good. If not, that's okay. But I wanted to give you that practice of like, because I know like the first time I see an FRQ, even though I've answered like a million of them, the first time I see it, even once I've answered before, I'm like, I have this like split second, like, oh God, this is gonna be hard, or I don't know because I don't have the answer off the top of my head. I kind of have to like think about it for a second. So that kind of split second panic and then finding kind of like working your way through it, that's kind of an important part of FRQ answering to me, even though it may not be content or anything like that. Just working past that split second, oh gosh, I have no idea, I think is helpful. So I'll try and mention a couple other things. A lot of times these critters don't have a lot of babies, and so there's not a lot of, if one dies, that might be their only baby, or they care for their babies for a really long time. So the mothers are kind of like indisposed and kind of not as, I guess, fit in the population because they're having to drag that baby around and care for that baby. A lot of endangered species don't have babies until they're really old. Like for example, grouper, like they don't have babies till they're like 25 or 30 or something like that. And so, even if you released a bunch of groupers into the wild that you've made in a captive breeding program, if they can't make it to that reproductive age, they're not going to survive, and they're not going to make babies, to the next population. Like, they're not going to make the next generation. So, stuff like that, or like for example, a panda, right? A panda eats bamboo. You can't release a panda in an area that doesn't have bamboo, or they're not going to have anything to eat. So, even something as simple as that, their diet requirements can make it difficult. So, yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Okay, let's go to the next one. So now we're saying one economic or ecological argument for protecting the condor, the whooping crane, or another endangered species you identify, and make one economic or ecological argument against protecting it. So we kind of want to play devil's advocate here. So we're going to make an argument to protect the condor, and then we're going to make an argument against not protecting it. Now, a lot of folks, ecological is going to relate to like its role in the environment. Okay. And then economic has to relate back to money. Okay. The place where most students lose points on like FRQs on your test, or on, just the regular FRQs that you submit, is when it says economic, they don't relate it back to money. And that's the biggest way to lose points, because you've got to somehow relate it back to money. So, for example, we could say like ecotourism, for example. Like we could say, bird watchers love to come and look at the whooping crane, so we should protect it. Wait. That has no economic or no ecological, right? We can't just say ecotourism because bird watchers love to the whooping cranes. Okay, that's not going to work, right? But then you can say which provides tourism dollars to local economy. Okay, now it's economic. Now you get your point. Okay, because you related it back to money. Okay, and then we can say, why don't we want to protect them, right? Like what could be a reason why you did not want to protect an endangered species? Like, why would you not want to do that? An economic or ecological reason. So personally, I like doing the economic ones because I think they're easier to relate. As long as you relate it back to money somehow, you're good. Where ecological, you've got to relate it to like ecology. So you've got to talk about like biodiversity, or like keystone species, and like your niche and things like that. The profits provided by farming species. Exactly, right? We're making money in that area. Okay, so we could say something like, protecting, whatever. Let's do the condor, since we talked about agriculture with that one. Protecting the condor is I'm struggling to write economically. because the lands, let's call them habitat lands, converted to ag are profitable. And condors produce no money. Okay. So, there we go. So that was good. And another thing you'll notice is I get in, I say what I need to say, and then I'm done. I go to the next one. I don't like write these like long drawn out stories because, like, for example, on the AP exam, you get 4 FRQs and you get 90 minutes to do the 4 FRQs. So that's like 22 and a half minutes a piece. So you don't have a lot of time to dilly-daddle on the exam. You got to, answer, because you got to think, and then you got to write, and then, you got to go to the next one and think and write, and maybe do some math. And so you don't have a lot of time to kind of fiddle. So what I suggest you doing, like with the FRQs in this class, is, when you're going to write one, just see if you can write one in 22 minutes. If you don't get it all done in 22 minutes, you can go, add the rest so you get full points or whatever before you turn it in. But just see what you can get done in 22 minutes. And then hopefully as the semester progresses, you might get a little faster. So that's another thing that I recommend students try.